It's not depend on me, and that's the big difference between the Protestant churches, the mainstream Protestant churches, and the Roman Catholic Church, the theology of it. Why? Because once you go to the Episcopalian Church and you celebrate the Mass, well, they believe that Jesus is present there, but if there is extra wine that has been consecrated, what do they do with it? They go and they dump it in the through the drain or whatever, and because for them Jesus is not there any longer. For us, Jesus is there until the wine or the blood of Christ is consumed. Okay? So once again, when we are presenting bread and wine, what is happening? We see, and we just celebrated the beautiful celebration of Corpus Christi last weekend. And we read did you read the beautiful sequence after the second reading last weekend at your masses or not? No, you didn't? We should have, okay? Because the theology, there is a sequence, there is a prayer after the second reading for every time that we celebrate the body of Christ, the Corpus Christi. Okay, so when we present bread and wine, yes, it's bread and wine, okay? But what does it make it to be the body and blood of Christ? Is what Jesus did the day that he instituted the Eucharist, and when he died on the cross, and when he rose from the dead, okay? The presence of Jesus does not depend on me. It depends on him whom accomplished the reality of the Paschal mystery in humanity. That's what makes it to be a real thing. Okay? For the mainstream Protestant churches like the Lutheran and those who celebrate the Eucharist or the sacraments, okay? It depends on what? Do you know?
Their faith.
Yes. It is the faith of the people that makes the sacrament, the effectiveness of the sacrament is there. It's the faith of the people in the Protestant churches. For us Roman Catholics, it's not like that.
That's why we have special reverence.
Yes.
But you would wish they would have the faith.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay? But for us, it does not depend on the faith of the people. It depends on what Jesus accomplished for us. Okay? Because he was the one that died, he was the one that suffered, and he was the one that rose from the dead. Does it make any sense what I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to teach you here is the difference between sacramental theology in the Roman Catholic Church and sacramental theology in the Protestant churches. So you will see the difference between the two of us. And that's why this is so important for us. Okay? Is that clear so far?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So the second thing that I want to say to you is open your ritual of matrimony on page 11. Do you see it, page 11?
Yes.
Okay, so there is another big concept there for the sacrament of matrimony. And the word that we find there is what? Covenant. Covenant. That's a big, huge thing. We understand ourselves as a covenantal people, okay? Why? Because this is a theology, a theme that is developed in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And in fact, the celebration of the Eucharist, what we have as the celebration of the Eucharist, one of the ways how we understand the Eucharist is as a covenant that God has made with his people. What is a covenant?
A promise.
Yes, but it's more than that.
A relationship.
Very good, but that's the sacramental part of it. But when we're talking about
Contract?
it's a contract.
Contract commitment.
Very nice, very good. It's a contract.
It's an irrevocable contract.
Yeah, but when we look at it from the biblical point of view, okay? So if you look at it from the secular way, a contract is an agreement, okay? Covenant is an agreement, is a contract. And that contract happens between, most of the time, two parties, but it could be more than two parties, okay? It depends on the contract or the agreement that you're making, okay? So when there is a contract and when there is an agreement, there are two conditions for that to take place. What are they?
Consent,
Not really.
so close.
Yes, close though, yeah.
Valid, you have to have faculties to make the contract.
But we're not looking at it from the theological perspective of it, but from the secular point of view, right at this moment. So you can understand the difference, the secular agreements and contracts, and the way how we see it from the Bible perspective, or the theological perspective. So a contract, when you are making an agreement, let's say that you are buying a car. So what are the two conditions for that contract to be in place? When you're buying a house, when you're selling a bicycle, what are the two basic things for the contract to be?
Two parties.
Yeah, that's good.
Agreement,
Okay.
Sound mind.
Yes. What is it?
Sound mind. Meaning of the mind.
Duties and benefits. Okay.
duties and benefits?
Yeah. So responsibilities. I, as a seller, I have the responsibility to sell this, and it has to be in good condition. Okay. And the other one is the responsibility that the buyer has is to pay it. And the benefit that he's getting out of it is that he's going to enjoy this good, okay, this thing. And that happens for the seller and for the buyer, okay? So there are in the two parties, there are those two things that need to take place, okay? What is the difference between that and a covenant? A covenant is sacred.
It's not, the
Binding.
contract's not dependent on the performance of the other party.
It depends on the, how do you call it, the amendments or the things or the, the amendments that you put on the agreement or the contract. Because it can get very complicated. But that's the very simple way to look at it. Okay? So, in order to understand the sacrament of marriage, we need to get into this because otherwise you are not going to understand why marriage is a covenant. And we need to understand what a covenant is first before getting into the theology of marriage. Does that make any sense? So, a covenant makes it to be a covenant because it's sacred. It's established by God. Okay? And that's the difference between civil marriage and the sacrament of marriage. And it's a big, huge difference because civil marriage is just simply a contract. It's an agreement between two people where each one of them are going to have responsibilities and benefits. That's how a contract is looked at. Okay? But now a covenant is established by God. And in many cases, God is the one that is going to determine what those benefits and what those responsibilities are going to be. He's not going to depend on us many times. Okay. Why is God making covenants? Okay? And the answer to that question is in the first reading that we are going to hear today. For the 10th Sunday of the Ordinary Time, which comes from the book of Genesis in chapter 3. And that's the fall, okay? So, we were created in communion with God. We were created to be perfect, in perfect union with God. So, humanity didn't know about pain, didn't know about loneliness, didn't know about any of those things. We were perfectly made in the image and the likeness of God. Okay? That's how God created us. Now, because God created us that way, and also He created us with a gift that we still exercise. Which is that gift?
Freedom of choice.
Free will. Okay? Free will. Because we were created with free will, so they were given the choice. Because life is about choices. Okay? So we were given the choice to choose from evil and good. And of course, according to the story, that we find in the book of Genesis in chapter 3, human beings, not only Eve, but both man and woman, chose the opposite of God. And because they chose the opposite of God, then humanity started experiencing, that's why we hate, that's why we get hurt, that's why we gossip, that's why we get jealous, that's why we get those ideas about being unfaithful to our spouses, that's why we get, we could become the worst human being on earth. That's why all those things happen. That's why sin came into the world. And because that choice was made by Adam and Eve, by humanity, then we lost something. What was it that we lost in that covenant? Okay? This perfect union with God. We lost that. Okay? When humanity made the choice to reject and disobey the word of God. That's what happened there. And so when that took place, there was a hurt, there was a wound there. And the wound was that we didn't have God in his fullness anymore. And because of that, then God started to long, to desire, to want to have a relationship with us. From that moment, because this God understands himself in communion. He cannot exist without being in communion. And that's how we understand the Holy Trinity in the Catholic Church. It's a God that is in constant and perfect communion. He cannot see himself as not being in communion with the three persons. And because that is the nature of God, this is who this God is, then God is longing to have this communion with humanity. And he's always establishing all those covenants with these people. And the first covenant is what? Do you remember what the first covenant was?
The Adamic covenant?
The what?
Adamic?
No. It's in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis.
Noah?
Noah. So that was the first covenant. Okay. And there were many different covenants, and there are 2 or 3 different kinds of covenants. There is the ritual covenant, and there is the ethnic covenant, and there is other covenants. And we are not going to get into that. Some of those covenants were broken. Most of them were broken. Why? Because this God wanted to be in communion with his people, but his people chose something else. Remember, it's always about what? Choices. Okay? Until Jesus came and he made the most perfect covenant with us. It was by the Paschal mystery, and he left us the Eucharist, and that is the covenant. There is no other covenant. We don't have to look and wait for another covenant, because the covenant was already fulfilled. It was already established. Nobody else in the history of humanity is going to come and establish a new covenant, because this covenant was already done. And nothing will destroy this covenant like the covenants in the Old Testament that were destroyed every time. Why? Because one of the requirements was that the people had to be faithful to this God who was always faithful to his people, but they decided not to follow God and went and worshipped other gods. And every time that happened, then they destroyed the covenant. Not even this. Not even being a rapist. Not even being a sexual offender. Not even being a serial criminal, killer, is going to destroy this covenant.
Idolatry.
Not even that is going to destroy this covenant. Nothing will destroy the covenant that Jesus established with us. Because the covenant is always there for us. It's going to be, this covenant is unlike the covenants from the Old Testament.
Let me explain. I read some of the USDCB put out, it's on their website, about marriage in 2009. I forget the title, but they said that marriage is the one sacrament that was not affected or deterred by original sin.
Not even by the flood. Yes, that is the blessing that we do, and you are going to do the blessings when you celebrate weddings, when you witness weddings. So that is a blessing that is there. Yes. Okay. So that is very important, and he is the one that establishes those covenants. It's not us. It's not, oh, I like this about this covenant, but I don't like this other thing about this covenant. No. He sets the rules for it. It's not up to me to choose what I like or don't like about the covenant. He is the one that decides how the covenant is going to be established, and he has set the rules. Okay? That's one thing. Now, if we understand what a covenant is, now we need to look at matrimony, marriage as a covenant. Okay. So in the first number 1 there in the introduction on page 11, it says, the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish a lifelong partnership between themselves derives its force and strength from creation. But from the Christian faithful, it is also raised up to a higher dignity, since it is numbered among the sacraments of the new covenant. Okay. So what is that saying? That's saying a lot there, and we can spend the next 2 hours, 3 hours, just talking about that sentence or that paragraph there. Okay? Why? Now, you heard there that the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish a lifelong partnership between themselves derives its force and strength from creation. So let's see from scriptures, where does it come from? So we want to go to the book of Genesis in chapter 1, okay? And in chapter 1 we are going to find the first definition, establishment, the first thing about a matrimony, okay? Let me see if I can find it.
Chapter, which chapter?
Chapter 1, I think it is.
What verse?
Where it says, 24, 25, 26, 27, something like that. Let's see. Oh no, sorry. That is chapter 2, because he also talks about it in chapter 2, verse 24. Okay, I found it. Chapter 2, verse 24. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two of them become one body. The man and his wife were both naked, yet they felt no shame. Okay, so verse 24, not 25, because I also read verse 25. But verse 24 gives us the very first, and the very first time in the scriptures gives us the definition about matrimony. Okay? So, remember, a covenant is something that is established by whom? By God. He's the one that sets the rules. Now, so this covenant is, the matrimony is between whom?
Man and woman.
Yes. And I want you to understand this, because this is where the Catholic Church comes from, because we will never change this. We will never go for same-sex marriage. And I want you to understand this, because this is very important for us. The Church, even if another 2,000 years go by, in 2,000 years from now, this will not change by the Catholic Church. Okay? Why? Because God has revealed to us in sacred scriptures that this covenant is between a man and a woman. It's not between Peter and John, or Martha and Cecilia. No. Okay? Or it's not between a man and his horse, or between a woman and her dog. No. It's between a man and a woman. Okay. Now, because this is a covenant, then this is established by God. A covenant is what? Sacred.
Sacred, established by God.
Yes. It's something sacred. So when we say that this is something that has been established by God and is holy, then nobody has the power to change this. It means that not even the Queen of England or the President of the United States of America, or the Mayor of San Francisco, or whomever. Nobody has the power to change something that has been instituted by God. So for us in the Catholic Church, matrimony is a divine institution. It is a divine institution. Okay? What else do we find here? So derives its force and strength from creation. Why from creation? Because this is how God created us. And we read that in chapter 1, verse 27. Okay? God created man in his image, in the divine image he created him. What did he create them?
In his image.
Male and female he created them. In his image. That's it. He created them in his image. So that's why it derives its force and strength from creation, because this is how God created them. Okay? Very good. But for the Christian faithful, it is also raised up to a higher dignity, since it is numbered among the sacraments of the new covenant. Okay? So this is how we live this covenant with Jesus. We live this covenant with Jesus through matrimony, because this is what God intended from the very beginning of creation. So for married people, this is how they are to live out, to experience, to encounter the divinity, the divine life of God through the sacrament of marriage. Because this is something that God instituted himself. And he is the one that set the rules for it. Is it clear what I'm trying to explain to you?
Yes.
Okay, very good. You're so intelligent. So a marriage is established, number 2, a marriage is established by the conjugal covenant, that is, the irrevocable consent of both spouses. Okay. What is the irrevocable consent of both spouses? Who can tell me about that? All of you are married, right? Yes? Okay. So you know better than me what that means.
Till death do us part.
Very good. And what else? Not only that, that's like the last sentence.
Freedom to choose.
Yeah.
You chose that.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully, when you got married in the church, you freely, that's one of the things, remember everything is about what? With this God, is about what?
No.
Choices.
You
Choices.
freely chose.
So you're choosing your spouse. Hopefully freely. You choosing. That's how God created us. Free will. That's what free will is all about.
Can there be an arranged marriage and still be a sacramental Catholic marriage?
Oh, that's a very good question. Because some cultures do that.
Yeah.
In India, that happens. That's a very good question. What are you saying?
I don't think if you can't choose your spouse, then you're not entering into, unless you're following your parent, you want to follow your parents' counsel to marry this person.
You choose that.
You choose to follow your tradition. Then it could be sacramental.
Yeah, that's very good. Okay? And even when you make a free choice of choosing your spouse, sometimes that is not even, and you're giving your consent freely about being married to this other person, even then, that cannot happen to be a sacramental marriage.
It has to meet a lot of conditions.
Yes.
No duress.
You can't be in another covenant.
And there are certain conditions for that to happen. Okay? What if you enter into this free consent, given consent relationship with this other person and a covenantal relationship of matrimony, but you didn't know about if the other person was doing the same thing?
Or if they're a blood relative that's too close. You don't know that,
Yeah, right.
if the person was adopted.
Yeah. So there is a lot of things that play into it. And that's why annulments take place they take place in the church. Why? Because what the church is trying to do is to find reasons why this marriage shouldn't have taken place to begin with. Because they were not mature, or the conditions were not there for the sacrament to take place. Does it make any sense? Yeah? Very good. You're good. Okay, so a marriage is established by conjugal covenant, that is the irrevocable consent of both spouses. Okay? And when you do, have you ever done the questionnaire for prenuptial questionnaire yet? Have you done it? Okay, so there are questions that you fill out with the person, the people that are going to get married in the church. Okay, and one of those questions is, are you putting any conditions? Are you giving any conditions? Are you, are you putting any conditions on your consent about this marriage? Remember that question? And if the person says yes, what happens? Are you supposed to celebrate the wedding?
No.
No. Because the consent is not given freely at this exchange of vows. Okay? So that's something that you need to understand as well.
So if they sign a prenuptial agreement, that can't be
So they're
here?
gonna say, if you have a
Right.
prenuptial agreement, you can't, it's not a sacramental marriage.
I didn't know that.
Yeah?
Yeah. You better fix that.
That's why the church has that questionnaire there.
Because you can see the reason for prenuptials. I mean, not in my life, but, you know,
Ooh.
some people's lives. I mean, you know, what we have together is what we built together, not anything we had before in our case, so there was no prenuptial, but you can understand why the older you are, sometimes people, it's not uncommon, they have prenuptial agreements because they have kids from other marriages or whatever.
But when you're doing that, you are being honest and you are giving yourself freely that way. Does it make any sense?
But that's the stipulation too.
Yes.
What if the prenup was signed after the wedding?
Oh, you cannot do that.
And it's
Well,
not-
isn't it?
That has to be done
That's a
before
post
the
nup.
But
wedding.
it's a
No.
pre-
That's a
isn't it
post
pre-
nup,
But it's
no.
a prenuptial, so it's before marriage, isn't that right?
Prenuptial question.
Yeah.
Yes. That's before the wedding takes place. Because you need to make sure that those two persons, those two people are really free to enter marriage.
Okay, so there's a pregnancy.
What do you
Okay?
mean?
Well, let's say you got a couple she's pregnant, and they want a sacramental marriage.
Well, that's fine, that doesn't mean you're not getting married just because the baby's.
Well, what I'm saying is maybe there's a little bit of duress on parties.
Well, that's true, if you.
That can happen, but I have done some of those, and I have one that I did in '98, I think it was, and they're still together.
Yeah.
But prenuptial agreement, they could still be together, 20,
Yes.
but it's not a sacrament.
No, it is a sacrament. As soon as the wedding is done in the church, it's a sacrament.
Okay.
As soon as you do all the paperwork and do the blessing and all that stuff, it is sacramental
Okay.
marriage.
I
Yes.
misunderstood, okay.
So you're saying that if there's a prenuptial, you can still have a sacramental marriage?
But all the paperwork and the blessing and the exchange of vows, they need to happen though. Does it make any sense?
No, I'm lost.
Okay, so whatever agreement is done before, and you want to be married in the church, and the two people understand very well what they are getting into, okay? So once the blessing takes place in the church, once the wedding takes place within the church, then it's sacramental.
So if two people are want to get married and there is a prenuptial agreement, and
Can they be married in the church? Yes.
so you're saying that as long as they know about the prenuptial agreement, they both agree to the prenuptial agreement, they both have full knowledge of the prenuptial agreement, then they can have a sacramental marriage. Okay. Thank you.
What if, for example, one of the two say, okay, I'm not able to conceive or to, I'm not fertile at all, so we will never have babies. Is that an impediment for that couple to be married in the church?
Only if they have the ability to have children and saying they're not gonna have
Right.
children.
Yes, so what if that's the prenup?
Right.
I don't want kids, I'm never gonna have it, I want you to sign this saying you're never gonna have
You
it.
can get sacramental marriage on that.
Well, one of the conditions for the marriage to be marriage, especially for young couples, because we can celebrate marriages with older couples, and the reason why we do is because they have gone through divorces and stuff like that, but they're old enough, especially the ladies, that cannot conceive more kids anymore. And because that is there, does it mean that the sacrament is not taking place?
You just have to be open to life if it's possible.
Right.
But if there was a prenup that said that those two people do not want
Yeah,
kids.
you have to catechize those people, and you have to say, the reason why you're getting married is because you want to multiply and you want to be fertile. Because that's the reason why God created man and woman. Does it make any sense?
Yes.
Yeah, because a lot of those young kids, they want to get married, but they don't want to have babies, they want to have dogs.
Yeah.
So you have to catechize those people and say, the reason why we are getting you married into the church, or you want to be married into the church, is because you want to have babies.
My first 10 years of marriage with just dogs was pretty good.
My kids. I have a great
But
dog.
were you always open to have babies, kids? Sometimes, and I know this case, and I have not only one, a few cases, okay? Where they get married, they're in their 30s, and she cannot get pregnant. Or she gets pregnant, and then she cannot carry the babies through the whole pregnancy, okay? But that happens. And there's a lot of factors also that play into it. Stress, work. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So, but you really need to teach people that they need to be open to life.
So if you're interviewing a couple, pre-marriage interview, and you find out like the bride is currently on birth control pills, you can't do the marriage then, can you?
That's a very good question, and once again, catechesis is very important.
You dodged that answer.
Well, I think that's the reality.
Yeah.
It is the reality, but once again, you need to teach Humane Vitae. Humane Vitae is the encyclical written by Paul VI that talks about, being open to life. And so, what the church teaches, and in many cases, when, like for example, in the Hispanic community, that happens a lot. The case of being in birth control and stuff like that, or living together. So one of the things when they approach us, they tell us about it, and we say, okay, how about abstinence during the time that you are getting everything ready for your marriage? And some of those people will agree. They will say, okay.
But you gotta bring that out of them. You gotta have a discussion and bring out.
You need to bring them to that understanding.
But you do understand that physically, the woman has to be on the birth control ahead of time to marriage. Because that's how your body, it needs that extra protection. You cannot start the birth control pill on the
Okay,
day
have you ever
married.
done natural family planning? Have you ever done that?
No, but my mama did, and she'd have had 13 if we all lived.
Okay, but it depends on the nature of women. Some women are regular and some other women are irregular when they're having their period or their menstruation, okay? So when you go to some of those classes will teach both, not only women, but also guys need to understand how the female body works in order for this to work.
So they would encourage them to go.
And there are classes that are being taught about this thing. Yes.
But that's not necessarily a requirement for a sacramental marriage.
Some guys will make you take those classes before you go, you do your wedding. When they come to me, I make them take that. So they understand that they need to be open to life. And that abstinence is a good thing that can happen in your marriage life. Actually, that can strengthen your relationship. Because not everything is about sex, especially when you are in the 20s and the 30s. Once you get older, everything starts falling apart. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So we're speaking the same language. Furthermore, let's see. Moreover, the singular union of a man and a woman, I am in number 2, requires, and the good of children demands the complete fidelity of the spouses and the indissoluble unity of the bond. The way the Catholic Church understands marriage is this. Okay, so we already discussed the thing about being open to life and having kids. Okay, and you will come across about the many different situations. Okay, I am doing a women's retreat this weekend in my parish, and in 2 months from now I will be doing the men's retreat way up in Idaho, in Bloomington, Idaho. Okay, and a lot of those things come up when you're doing a retreat. Okay. And so, there was a case at the men's retreat one time where he says, okay, this is a young couple, okay? They're in the, she's like 4 years younger than he is, but they already have 5 kids. And he says, he comes up to me and he says, hey, wait a minute, we need to stop here. Okay? When something like that happens, you need to tell them what the church teaches is not your opinion that you're teaching. It's not, well, like one time I went to a youth retreat way down in St. George. And there was this girl that she was pregnant by her boyfriend. And she came to confession with me and she told me, I'm going to have an abortion. And I said, no, 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 no. And I told her, she was young at that time and stupid like most of us when we are young. And so I told her, no, you're going to have that baby. When I became the pastor of St. George, that girl made her first Holy Communion with me when I was there. And then later on, she got married to the father of that girl. So God works in mysterious ways. God works in mysterious ways.
What a joyful day that was.
Yeah. So you never know. Okay? So you really have to say, every time you have to say the truth. Okay? And so, this other guy was very, I'm so worried. And so, I told him what he needed to do. They went and they had the, how do you call them? The tubes. No.
Tubalization.
Yes, thank you.
What?
Tubalization.
Yeah.
Oh, tubalization, okay.
So I said, okay, that was your decision. So he says, what do I do? Go to confession. God forgives everything. Okay? Anyway. So then the next thing. There are 2 characteristics of marriage in the Catholic Church, and that comes from the Gospels. So we're going to read Gospel of Mark chapter 10, I think it is. I'm sure.
Chapter what?
10. Mark 10.
What verse?
Just one sec. I will tell you. Where did it go? Where did you go. Yes, 1.
Verse 1?
Yes. Marriage and divorce. He set out from there and went into the district of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds gathered around him, and, as was his custom, he again taught them. The Pharisees approached and asked, "Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. He said to them in reply, "What did Moses command you?" They replied, "Moses permitted him to write a bill of divorce and dismiss her." But Jesus told them, "Because of the hardness of your hearts, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate." In the house, the disciples again questioned him about this. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." So that's 1. Then we can go to Matthew, I think it's 19. Yes. Verse 1. Does anybody want to read it?
All right. Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female?" And he said, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they are no longer two but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away?" He said to them, "For your hardness of heart Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." And the disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry." But he said to them, "Not all men can receive this precept, but only those with whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to receive this, let him receive it."
Very good, thank you. Okay, so we find a few things here in those two texts. And Paul is going to address the problem or the issue of marriage in the Roman Greek cultures. Christians marrying non-Christians. And that happened at the beginning of the history of the church. And he's going to give the theology also about marriage in the letter to the Ephesians chapter 5. And he's going to call the sacrament of marriage a magnum sacramentum, which means a great sacrament. Okay? That's the title that he's going to give marriage in the letter when he writes to the Ephesians. Okay, so we find a few things. Those two texts are very similar to each other, but I want to draw your attention to one thing. So Jesus quotes the Old Testament, okay? And he says, in both cases, he says, in Matthew and Mark, he says, "Have you not read that from the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Okay, so once again, why is Jesus, and this is why we say that this is a divine institution, and this is sacred, and this is a covenant. Why? Because Jesus is teaching, he's teaching about marriage in Matthew and also in the Gospel of Mark as well. So he's going to the Old Testament, he's going to the book of Genesis in chapter 2, verse 24, yes, and also in chapter 1 and verse 27, I think it is, and he's quoting there. What is he doing there? He's reinforcing what God has revealed about matrimony in the Old Testament. This is his father's teaching. And so he's quoting the book of Genesis to say, hey, this is a covenant, this is something that God has instituted, this is sacred, this is divine. That's why he's quoting the Old Testament. When he quotes the book of Genesis and says, okay, a man shall leave his father and mother, join himself to his wife, and the two will become what?
Flesh.
Flesh. Okay. That verse, and he is teaching over that again, and that's the first characteristic in godly marriage. The first one is unity. That is the first characteristic. And that it comes from that quote. A man shall leave his father and mother, join himself to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Okay? Now, what is this? Well, there is a lot of things that we can do about this, and when we celebrated the dogma of the Holy Trinity a couple of weekends ago, okay? One of the ways how we understand this God is by in unity. The Holy Trinity has some characteristics. And one of the characteristics that they have is unity. In chapter 17 of the Gospel of John, Jesus is saying the prayer over the disciples. It's called the priestly prayer of Jesus. That is called the priestly prayer of Jesus is because there was a saint, a bishop in the church in the 5th century whose name was Cyril of Alexandria. So Cyril of Alexandria, when he was reflecting upon the chapter in the Gospel of John, he called it the priestly prayer of Jesus, and the tradition of the Catholic Church has known this chapter as the priestly prayer of Jesus since then. Okay? What is he doing there? He's saying this, Father, okay? I pray for these. Who are these? The disciples. And what is he praying to the Father for? What is he praying about? He's saying, Father, I pray for this, that they will be one as you and I are one. Okay. So when Jesus does this, the language that Jesus uses in the Bible, in scriptures, is a moment of revelation for us, because at that moment we are able to know who this God is. That's what Revelation is all about. Jesus is letting us come into the mystery of God. When Jesus talks about the Father, there is a lot of things that happen. There is a lot of dynamics that take place. So what are they? So when he uses this language and he calls God his Father, then he's defining the role of the Father in this relationship. Not only that, but also when he's calling the God the Father, he's also defining his own role in this relationship. If he's calling God his Father, what does it make him to be in this relationship? Son. Thank you. So I don't know what language you use between the two of you, but we are going to give an example. So you say honey. And you say, is there any other word besides honey that you use for each other, or what?
I say yes, dear, but she says.
Yes, dear. Okay. So yes, dear. And some other people will use funny words to describe the other person, right? Okay? My dear skinny, or I don't know, whatever. Pumpkin, or yes. All those things. Okay. So when you're using this language, what you are doing is that you are defining a relationship. That means that you're not calling anybody else this name, this nickname, this word of love or whatever. You're not using this word, this expression, and this phrase, this sentence to call anybody else, but the people that you most love in your life. And when you're using that type of language, you're defining that relationship. That's what Jesus is doing there when he's talking about his Father. It's exactly the same thing. Okay? So the language is going to define relationships. Not only that, but also the language is going to reveal to us who this other person is. Because it's by those words that you are using to call the other person, you are opening onto other people how much you love, appreciate, care, want, desire this other person. Does it make any sense what I'm trying to say? That's called revelation. The reason why I'm saying this is because matrimony is a sacrament, is a covenant, is divine institution, and God wants man and woman to have the same thing that He, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, have within themselves. He wants this unity between the man and a woman. They want this unity. I pray, Father, that there will be one as you and I one. And so that's why unity is one of the characteristics of marriage. So man and woman, woman and man, husband and wife, wife and husband will be one. This is the theology of marriage. So we will be one. Okay? Does it make any sense? Okay, very good. We're getting deeper into this thing.
So the marriage should reflect the unity that's in the Trinity.
Yes! That's why it reflects, that's why it's a covenant. Not even the flood or original sin destroyed. Because God made it this way. He established it this way. Okay? Very good. So how does this work, this unity thing? In the Gospels, both in Mark and Matthew, so he says, why did Moses allow us to grant, why did he grant a decree of divorce? Why?
Hardness of heart.
The hardness of your hearts. Yes. Well, because some of those choices that we make are very stupid. Okay? Sometimes, or many times, we choose the wrong person. Okay? Or we chose the wrong person, but I'm sorry, we chose the right person, that's what I tried to say. We chose the right person, but because of the hardness of our hearts. What does that mean? It's because of my own selfishness, I wanted to do it my way. Dear, it's not your way, it's my way. So, for them, for the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, is something that is given because it's their God, this perfect unity. Because we made a choice of separating ourselves from God at creation, when Adam and Eve chose not to have God in their lives anymore, okay, because they were seduced by the serpent, and the devil told them, hey, you're not going to die. He told them a lie. Don't believe him. I'm telling you the truth. It's very interesting because the devil gets into our minds and into our hearts and makes us believe that the lie that we live in is the truth and it's not a lie, because that's how many people live and have lived in the history of humanity. And so we live our lives like living lies. But when we are told the truth, we don't want to believe the truth because we think it's a lie. Why? Because the devil already put that in us. But Jesus, God created us to live in the truth. Does it make any sense? Okay. So how does this happen? It's a process. Okay? And I'm going to describe that process. And I elaborated a whole homily on this. That's why I'm telling you this. Okay? So it follows 4 parts. There are 4 parts to it. And that's also the relationship between and this is about discipleship. So I spoke about the relationship, the friendship of Jesus and the disciples, and that was one of the Gospels for Easter Sunday, or one of the Easter Sundays. So the first, in a relationship, what happens is, the first step is meeting the other person. And not only your spouse, but a friend, anybody. So you come and say hi. It's like when you're standing at the, in line at the marketplace and talking to the other person. Oh, it's gonna be very hot. Oh yeah, and the conversation goes back and forth, and that's it. You are going to have that conversation probably once in your lifetime, and you are not going to see that person anymore, because it just happened that you were there and that took place. That is the first thing that happens. And that happens with every relationship that you have in your life. So some of those relationships are not going to develop, some of those relationships are going to develop. Okay? So that is the first thing. The second thing, the second step in a relationship, and this is what Jesus did with the disciples. He said to the disciples, hey guys, what are you doing? Oh, we're fishing. Okay, follow me. Okay, that was the first thing. Second thing, the relationship gets deeper, okay? So when that relationship is getting deeper, then a few things are going to take place. You start opening up. And when you start opening up, then you start revealing yourself. And when you are revealing yourself, you are letting the other person come into the mystery of your life. And the relationship gets deeper because you start taking the risk. And the risk means that you are vulnerable. You become vulnerable. What does that mean? That you start revealing things about yourself that you will not reveal to other people, to other persons. But you're taking that risk. You become vulnerable. That's what Jesus does with his disciples. Jesus lets the disciples come into the mystery of his life. Okay? And he reveals himself as the God that he is. And the disciples are able to see that. And he's taking a risk, and he takes the risk. And not everybody, not all the disciples honor and respect the risk that Jesus takes to reveal himself. Why? Because he's betrayed. There is one that betrays him. And that hurts. And when that happens in the life of Jesus, what is he teaching us? What is he teaching us? When we love, and when we open up ourselves, and when we let other people come into the mystery of our lives, and we take the risk to become vulnerable, this is going to happen to us also. And that's what it means to love. To love means to take the risk and to become vulnerable.
Even though you know things could go sideways, you still take the risk.
Yeah, Jesus did it, and he was giving us an example when he took the risk with Judas. Okay? So, hopefully, that happens in this relationship between a wife and a husband and a wife. Okay? It's the same thing that happens between the master and the disciples. Okay, so when that is on the third step is taking place, then what happens is, what happens next? It's beautiful, it's amazing. Communion. That is communion. Okay? What does that mean? Communion means that you have the same things that you like. You like to read the same books, you like to hike, you like to listen to the same music, you like this, you like those, all those things. That is communion. Communion is not that I'm trying to change the other person to think like I think. That's not communion. And that happens a lot in the young couples. When she is trying to make him to be like her, it doesn't work that way. Or the other way around. It depends on the relationship. That you have to walk the same way, that you have to dress up the same way, that you have to go to the same places, that's not communion. That's not communion. That's manipulation in many different cases. So what is communion? Communion is when you both discover that you have strengths, that you have gifts, that you have talents, and that sometimes they are similar. Some of those things, some of those gifts, and some of those talents are similar.